Kathy Sierra. In 2007, she was one of the most respected voices in tech, known for writing books on programming and running a blog that hundreds of thousands of developers read every week. Then, without warning, her home address was posted online, alongside death threats and doctored images designed to humiliate her. The attack came from anonymous users on a fringe blog, and nobody was ever held accountable. Sierra canceled her speaking engagements, withdrew from the internet entirely, and later said the experience left her afraid to leave her own house. It was one of the earliest cases to show that online harassment could reach through a screen and collapse someone's entire public life. The tech community largely watched it happen and moved on. Sunil Tripathi. Sunil Tripath was a 22-year-old college student who had gone missing weeks before the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. When investigators were still searching for suspects, users on Reddit and 4chan began cross-referencing surveillance footage with photos of missing persons and concluded, incorrectly, that Tripathi was one of the bombers. The theory spread rapidly, including to journalists on Twitter who amplified it without verification. His family, already devastated by his disappearance, began receiving messages accusing their son of mass murder. Days later, the actual perpetrators were identified, and Tripathi was found deceased, his death unrelated to the bombing. His family had to grieve not only his loss, but the public destruction of his name. Reddit later issued a formal apology, though for many people the damage felt far too late to matter. Zoe Quinn. Zoe was an independent game developer. In 2014, became the center of what the internet would later call Gamergate. After a personal relationship ended badly, her ex-partner published a lengthy post online, making personal accusations against her. Within hours, organized groups had located her home address, phone number, and financial information, and began circulating them across forums and social platforms. The harassment that followed lasted months and included thousands of targeted messages, threats against her life, and coordinated attempts to have her removed from professional spaces. Quinn eventually left her home and spent time couch surfing to stay safe. The case drew mainstream attention to how quickly online communities could mobilize against a single individual, and it dragged several other women in gaming, including Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu, into the same wave of targeted abuse. Michael Bruch. Bruch spent years as one of Reddit's most active moderators under the username Violenta Crez, quietly overseeing communities that hosted content most people would consider deeply objectionable, including forums dedicated to photographs of women taken without their knowledge. In 2012, journalist Adrian Chen at Gawker identified him by name, revealing his real identity, his employer, and his location in Texas. Bruch lost his job within days of the article going live. The case split opinion sharply. Some argued it was legitimate journalism exposing someone who had caused real harm to real people. Others saw it as a dangerous precedent, a reminder that even figures who operate openly online can be stripped of the boundary between their screen persona and their private life. The debate about where doxing ends and accountability begins became a recurring argument online for years afterward. Kyle Quinn. In August 2017, photographs from the Charlottesville white nationalist rally spread rapidly across social media, and thousands of people began trying to identify the participants. Quinn, an engineering professor in Arkansas, was matched incorrectly to a man in one of the photos. His name, his university, his wife's name, and his contact details were shared across Twitter and Facebook, with captions calling him a white supremacist. He received so many threats that he and his wife left their home and stayed with colleagues. The real subject of the photo was identified days later, but Quinn's information had already reached hundreds of thousands of people. He spent months afterward dealing with the fallout, and the incident became a widely cited example of how the impulse to expose wrongdoing can destroy the life of someone who had nothing to do with it. Adria Richards. In 2013, she was attending a tech conference in Santa Clara when she overheard two men behind her making jokes she found offensive and unprofessional. She photographed them and posted the image on Twitter, tagging the conference organizers. One of the men was fired from his job shortly after. Within hours, Richards herself became the target of a coordinated harassment campaign. Her personal address, her employer's contact information, and her phone number were posted publicly. Her company's servers were taken offline by a denial of service attack, and she received threats graphic enough that she later described being genuinely frightened for her physical safety. She was fired not long after. The case became a rare and troubling example of two doxing events happening almost simultaneously in response to each other, each one accelerating the damage the other caused. Andrew Finch. Finch was a 28-year-old man living in Wichita, Kansas, who had no involvement in gaming disputes, online arguments, or internet communities of any kind. In December 2017, a dispute between two online gamers escalated until one of them gave a fake address to another person who agreed to make a swatting call, which means reporting a false hostage situation to trigger a heavily armed police response. The address given was Finch's home. Officers arrived expecting an active threat and shot him within seconds of him appearing at his front door. He died that night. The man who made the call was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Finch's case was not a doxing in the traditional sense, but it became the most widely discussed example of what happens when personal location information, even wrong information, becomes a weapon in an argument between strangers online. The Capitol riot identifications. Following January 6, 2021, a loose network of amateur researchers, journalists, and activists began working to identify every individual captured on camera inside the United States Capitol building. The effort was large enough that it spawned dedicated websites, forums, and social media accounts tracking faces, clothing details, and visible tattoos. Many identifications led to legitimate criminal referrals and FBI tips that contributed to actual prosecutions. But the same infrastructure also produced errors. Several people were wrongly identified and faced serious professional and personal consequences before corrections were issued. The episode became one of the most complex examples of mass public identification in internet history because it happened in a context where the underlying event was a federal crime, which made questions about the ethics of civilian doxing genuinely difficult to resolve. Law enforcement ultimately relied on many of the same tips while also distancing itself from the methods used to gather them. The GhostSec campaigns. Following the 2015 Paris attacks, the hacker collective Anonymous declared war on the Islamic State and began releasing what it claimed were lists of social media accounts and real identities linked to the organization. The group GhostSec, an offshoot, took a more aggressive approach, publishing names and locations it believed belonged to active recruiters and financiers. Intelligence agencies quickly warned the public that many of the names on these lists were wrong, and that publishing them could compromise ongoing investigations or endanger uninvolved individuals. The campaigns raised a question that had never been seriously tested before at that scale: whether doxing, when aimed at a designated terrorist group, carries the same ethical weight as doxing aimed at a private citizen. Governments said it did, and that civilian interference in counterterrorism operations created more problems than it solved. The Proud Boys database leak. In the months following the Capitol riot, an anonymous group published what it claimed was an internal membership list for the Proud Boys, a far-right organization that had been present at the events of January 6th. The list included names, email addresses, and in some cases home addresses of thousands of alleged members. Several people on the list disputed their inclusion entirely, saying their information had been attached to them without their knowledge or participation. Others confirmed they were members, but argued the release put their families at risk. Employers contacted people on the list, and some lost jobs before any verification process could take place. The leak illustrated a recurring problem with large-scale doxing. Even when the target group is widely condemned, the information released is almost never clean, and the people harmed most are often those whose inclusion was marginal or mistaken. If you want to help choose the next video topic, join our Telegram, links in the description. Otherwise, click right here to watch every brainwashing technique that has ever worked.